In today's video, we have lots of news about NHL players opting out of the return to play for the summer playoff tournament. We also have a few notes on the Montreal Canadiens, including Alex Romanov and Max Domi, and I want to further update the trade rumors concerning Brock Boeser that we discussed the other day. We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of news topics to discuss today. First off, I want to talk about some of the NHL players that have decided to opt out of the return to play for the 2020 NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. We don't have a lot of players so far. Of course, as we know, we had a pretty much close to an 80% vote in favor for the new CBA and return to play plan. So I didn't expect there to be a high volume of players opting out, but there's bound to be some. Obviously, everybody's situation is a little bit different, and you can't help but respect their personal decisions. I mean, this isn't for everyone. You have to outweigh the risk and reward here, and for some, the risk is just too high, and you certainly understand that. Now, the first player to come out and opt out, the news that we received was Calgary Flames defenseman Travis Hamonic. Of course, he's gone through a lot with his own personal family, his young children, a young child that's gone through a lot as well, and he just could not accept the potential risk that's involved here with this return to play. So I have nothing but respect for Travis Hamonic. He's a good guy, good family man, and obviously I respect that decision. It's unfortunate for the Flames. They'll certainly miss him on the blue line, but clearly that just, for him, this wasn't going to work. We also got word Montreal Canadiens defenseman Karl Alzner has opted out as well. Obviously, for the most part, Alzner's been somewhat of a spare part, a player who spent a lot of time in the minors since he was signed as a free agent by Montreal. So at least from a team perspective, that's not going to be too big of a blow, but obviously another guy who you respect his decision. We also saw news that Vancouver Canucks forward Sven Baertschi has opted out for personal reasons as well. So again, somebody who likely wouldn't have had a fairly big role with Vancouver. So from a team perspective, at least, we're not looking at too big a names. Oilers defenseman Mike Green is also opting out of the return to play plan. Of course, he was acquired near the trade deadline from the Detroit Red Wings. Green was traded to Edmonton, and he had a conditional pick as part of that trade, and that obviously will be satisfied and determined now. There was a 4th round pick in this year's NHL Draft that could have been upgraded to a 3rd round pick next year if the Oilers went, I believe, as far as the conference finals, and Green played in at least 50% of their team's games. So of course, since he won't be playing in those games, it doesn't matter how far the Oilers go at this point, that pick will not be determined, that they'll get that 4th round pick in the 2020 draft. So there's one trade with conditions on it that we will no longer have to speculate about on how that's going to be handled here moving forward. So Green will not be playing for the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, we already had word previously, but of course now we have confirmation that Roman Polak of the Dallas Stars is not coming back. He's a pending unrestricted free agent, and it is believed he's going to sign and play over in Europe, and likely doesn't return to the NHL at this stage of his career. I guess you never know, but he had comments saying he didn't want to be here, was questioning why he was still playing in the NHL even before things got shut down. So clearly for Polak, this doesn't seem to be a fit right now, and the Dallas Stars are certainly okay with that decision. So he'll remain over in Europe and won't return to Dallas or the NHL next season by the sounds of things. Now, I also saw word that Zach Trotman of the Pittsburgh Penguins will not be participating as well, but it doesn't sound like he was opting out. It sounds like he was being held out by the Penguins. Not really sure the exact reasoning behind that, but of course, he was likely going to be, a spare part, or for them, or like a black ace, I guess they usually call them. He didn't really see a lot of action. I believe he only played 8 games during the current regular season, so not really sure the exact circumstances behind that, but he won't be playing, at least not right away. And he also got news that Tampa Bay Lightning forward Steven Stamkos, who is expected to play, is not opting out or anything, but he does have an injury he's dealing with, which has allowed Tampa to call up another player to take a spot on a roster. He is doing some off-ice workouts. It doesn't seem to be anything overly serious. At this point, we have no reason to think that he will miss any of the Tampa's games to open up the playoffs. But he's certainly nursing an injury and not doing on-ice activities, at least at the present time. Player I forgot to mention as well that has opted out is Boston Bruin defenseman Steven Kampfer as well. Hard to say exactly what kind of role he would have had with the team, but he's not going to be joining the Bruins for this playoff run. So we very well could see more players decide to opt out. They still have time to do so. The deadline deadline is Monday evening. I believe it was 5 Eastern time. Obviously, like I said, at this point, nothing too substantial for big names. I mean, obviously, guys like Hamonic and Green, would have had a little bit more of a prominent role than some of the other guys that we mentioned here. But I guess we'll see any more players opt out. Now, just as far as opting out or deciding not to play, we do have some more news, and most of that is linked to the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, Habs forward Max Domi right now. It's not clear if he's going to play or not. The Canadiens have issued some information indicating that Domi and the team are going to take the next 7 to 10 days to determine if he will play in the playoffs or not. Obviously, right now, Phase 3 training camps are being set to open here shortly, but obviously it's still a while yet before there would be any in-game action. I assume Domi's probably training on his own right now, so he can be as close as he can to being ready to jump in if he gets the green light and decides to participate. But clearly Max Domi has some extra risk that a lot of players don't have to deal with, being a type 1 diabetic. Of course, that also applies to New York Rangers forward Kaapo Kakko. Haven't heard any more updates on Kakko's situation, but right now Montreal is saying 7 to 10 days before they get a firm decision on Domi. They're going to continue evaluating the situation in regards to his personal health, likely continue consulting with team doctors, infection control people, etc., and kind of decide what the plan is. I personally would not be shocked at all if Domi decides to sit out. Given his current health situation, there is a lot of risk associated if he were to become infected, and you just can't help but wonder if it's worth it. I mean, obviously, if Montreal were to go on a playoff run and actually come close to winning the Stanley Cup or something significant, I am sure that would absolutely be heartbreaking for him to not be a part of that. But at the same time, if they were to lose in the first round against the Pittsburgh Penguins, go into the draft lottery, you have to question if that's a lot of risk for him to be taking on, just for a handful of games that might not end up leading to much of anything. So it's difficult to say. I'm sure it's a really hard decision, but we're going to have to wait a little bit further on Domi's decision. Now, staying with Montreal, we also have some other news. There was a report today from The Athletic indicating that they have league sources saying at least 3 players on the Montreal Canadiens roster have been infected with COVID-19 and have tested positive. So, of course, due to confidentiality reasons, we do not have the names of those players. I'm surprised we even got that report because the NHL has already made it clear that teams are not allowed to make any announcements on injuries or positive tests during this remaining protocols here for Phase 3 and Phase 4. Any of those announcements will be made directly by the league. Of course, that gives them control over the language and what information is released. So I'm not sure what will cover that. Obviously, there's got to be somebody inside the Montreal bubble, if you will, that has given that information to the Athletic reporter. But we don't know who those players are and what that means for Montreal. But there's been numerous other positive tests, but so far there's nothing too serious. If the NHL players can get through this next little phase here of the training camp bubble, it's going to be the most difficult phase given all the hot spots around, especially in U.S. cities, that they need to get through before they get to Phase 4. I think the Phase 4 bubbles will be airtight and a pretty low risk, but obviously it depends on how tightly they keep everything in Phase 3 during their training camps and what they, how they decide to live their personal lives before they enter those bubbles. So I guess we'll have to be seen there, but clearly, a potential outbreak situation in Montreal. Hopefully it's contained. Hopefully the players are not going to be overly symptomatic and recover quickly, but we'll see what happens on that front. Now, in regards to Alexander Romanov, he is going to be joining the team. It sounds like he is going to be signing and making his contract official. We had reports a while back that he had agreed to terms, but it wasn't determined yet when the terms of his contract were going to kick in, if it's going to be 1920 or 2021. I believe right now it's sounding like he's going to sign and make it official for 1920. I believe Montreal sounds like they're okay with him burning a year on his entry-level contract, which means he'd be able to join the team for Phase 3 so he can get onto the on-ice workouts and practices. He can travel with the team to the hub cities, but he won't be able to jump into any game action, but it could still be a very valuable experience for him. So he could be joining the team here in short order to take part in those activities, and it sounds like that is going to happen. The same could be had for Kirill Kaprizov in Minnesota, as well as Ilya Sorokin with the Islanders. It sounds like there's a lot of work being done on those contracts. There is an opening window here for those players to sign contracts, burn a year, and participate to some extent in the next little while here. But we could very well see all 3 of those players sign and participate in NHL activities here very shortly. Now, as I mentioned as well, I want to talk a little bit further about the Brock Boeser trade rumors. Now, in the past 24 to 48 hours here, I had a video out talking about the news that broke out of Vancouver on TSN radio from Matt Sakaris, talking about the fact that the Vancouver Canucks seem to be seriously considering a potential Brock Boeser deal. Now, not to say that they were, out shopping him. They weren't, really wanting to get rid of Boeser, nothing like that. But of course, with the CBA now in place, we have a better outlook on what the salary cap is going to be like. But of course, we already kind of knew, there's no big surprise. We're going to have a flat cap for a few years, and there's a lot of teams that are impacted. And say what you want about the Vancouver Canucks, they've come a long way in the last few years. This rebuild has gone pretty well. They've drafted well. A lot of their young draft picks have turned into some pretty solid players. They got guys like Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson. They're going to lead this team for many years to come. Of course, Brock Boeser himself is, not that far removed from being a high draft pick. Of course, then they had some other guys in there as well. And obviously, at the same time, though, as much as they've drafted and developed well, at the same time, free agency has gone horribly wrong. They brought in a lot of bad veteran contracts. And even though they have a young, exciting hockey team, they have cap problems well before those players are even hitting their prime longer-term contracts, which is a big-time problem. So obviously, when you're rebuilding and you get all these young players that you're building around it or building excitement and growing for the future, you want to be able to have the necessary space to sign them, and you can obviously foresee cap problems starting to happen as those players mature and get those big-time deals. Like look at the Maple Leafs, for example, as guys like Matthews and Marner and Nylander all got their deals. And of course, they brought in Tavares. That created a tight cap situation for the Leafs, but they were already further along in the process, whereas Vancouver signed a bunch of expensive, not so great veteran contracts and free agency while these guys were still pretty young. And now they're kind of handcuffed here and might have to move out a piece like a Brock Boeser or something else, equivalent, to make some necessary space to get all these players that they need to keep in line. Of course, it's not that they want to move Boeser, but they need something as a sweetener to move some of these bad deals. They got Louis Eriksson, you've got Jay Beagle, you got Anton Roussel, you got Michael Furlan. You still got a year of Brandon Sutter, and obviously some of that money, or a good chunk of it, they have to find a creative way to move it out off the books. And the rumor was that Boeser could be a guy that helps them do that. Clearly, he has a lot of value, and he could be included as that piece to do that. They have some prospects that you could consider including, but their prospects are valued pretty highly right now. They have guys like Podkolzin, you've got Hoglander, you've got obviously like Rathbone, you have Jet Wu. They have some pretty good-looking prospects right now who could play big roles in this team for a long time to come. And if they don't really want to part with those, they don't have a ton of draft picks either. They're already, without a first-round pick this year. They don't have a lot of other assets. They might have to be a younger player actively on the roster to help accomplish this. So that's kind of the general summation of what happened around this Boeser rumor. But now there's been some other talk saying that Jim Benning wants to really sign Tyler Toffoli. And he wants to do that obviously because he's valued. So, because Toffoli had a tremendous, even though it was a short-lived stint with the Canucks, I guess we'll see what he can do in the playoffs here as well. But obviously he wants to avoid criticism for that trade, which obviously, isn't too surprising, but not really great. But, obviously Benning's done okay in his trades. The Toffoli trade so far looked pretty good. The Miller trade looked pretty good. But obviously you got to retain these guys or it can start to look bad down the road, which is really not good. But a lot of fans, especially, were talking about the fact that Toffoli came in, did a great job. Of course, Boeser was injured during that time. The Canucks were doing well, and you just can't help but wonder can we live without Boeser after all? Maybe he should be the guy to go. And obviously Canucks social media fans are certainly a large group of fans. They're very dedicated, very passionate group, and sometimes there's some big-time heated discussions on how the team should be managed. And obviously this has been a hot topic here over the past couple days since this bomb was dropped on TSN radio just a couple days ago. So obviously with some more context being offered that maybe they value Toffoli higher than Boeser, it's kind of surprising. I mean, Tyler Toffoli is an excellent hockey player. He's in his later 20s now. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. I can see why they'd like to keep him because he certainly played very well with them on the short stint after being acquired at the deadline. But at the same time, Boeser is younger. I think he's got a higher offensive upside, but you could maybe argue that Toffoli might be the better complete player. And maybe, obviously, that maybe could be part of the reason why the team played a little better with him in the lineup. But still, like, getting rid of one of your top young players, like a Boeser, who's a solid 30-plus goal scorer potential on a pretty reasonable contract, I think, it just would be a real shame. I'd really hate to see the Canucks have to give up one of their top young forwards because of free agent mismanagement and spending, as I mentioned the other day in that other video. Like, it just really is not the way to go. But you have to figure out something if you're Vancouver. You have to get creative. They're not the only team in this situation either. But I guess if you're a Canucks fan, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do you see Boeser being moved out as a sweetener in order to keep, like, Toffoli? They also need to sign Jacob Markstrom. They have some question marks on the blue line. Do they bring back Chris Tanev? Do they bring back Troy Stetcher? How do they do that? Or is a Boeser trade more likely to try to bring back like a really solid young stud defenseman who can play with a guy like Quinn Hughes? Do they want, a guy who can play the opposite side that's really solid or, close to being on the same similar level as him? Because, obviously Boeser has a ton of value, but there's just a lot of head shaking, a lot of question marks. Vancouver fans seem to be really split on what decisions this team should make in the offseason. And I'd love to know what you think down below. So let me know your thoughts. Should Boeser be possibly traded in order to keep Toffoli and Markstrom? What moves should they make? What do they do? They have lots of cap problems. There's several potential solutions, and it's not as simple as moving out the bad contracts. There's just no value in them, and there's just not a really clear-cut answer how they get out of this jam. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue discussing further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.